Secretary Baker, Ambassador Harab, Ambassador Papaduke, and ladies and gentlemen, it's a privilege to join you this evening on this special occasion and in honor of the man who played such a crucial role in the events that we commemorate today. I would also like to thank Secretary Pompeo for having spoken to us on this occasion and thus underlining the enduring legacy of that day and time for us today. Ladies and gentlemen, it was in 1983 when I started working on Eastern Europe. I was a young Foreign Service officer in Bonn. My job was to make sense of what happened on the other side of the wall and beyond. At the time, I analyzed the cracks in the veneer that were becoming apparent. On the one hand, efforts by Eastern European governments to gain more latitude, to try to assert their autonomy or even to dodge the directives from Moscow. On the other hand, their peoples were starting to clamor for something very different: freedom, rule of law, individual rights, liberties. They were looking west. They looked west because they saw in the United States a beacon of liberty. Americans had the freedom to say what they thought, to make the individual choices they wanted, to purchase what they liked, to travel where they wished. And they wanted their allies in Europe to have these choices too. Eastern Europeans, Eastern Germans for that matter, enjoyed none of these privileges. Their leaders enforced choices for them. It was the very existence and normative clout of the United States that inspired people in the East to stand up for their rights. The cases when brutal military force was used to put down democratic movements were still in living memory. But this didn't stop them. People were disillusioned. They were angry. And they yearned for freedom. The same freedom that Americans enjoyed themselves and supported in Western Europe. People also looked west because they knew what this unwavering American support meant. Friend and foe knew that the United States stood with its allies, come what may. No one in Europe had the faintest doubt that the United States would counter any challenge to the West's alliance, its security, its value-based way of life, and market economy. We understood this and relied on it. But perhaps even more importantly, the Soviet Union understood this. It defined how far it would go in challenging the Western status quo. There is, I think, no country that benefited more from it than Germany, West and East. After all, it was the United States that saved the people of Berlin during the Soviet blockade. It was the United States that supported Germany's recovery through the Marshall Plan, laying the groundwork for the post-war economic miracle. It was the United States that enabled the young republic to become a member of NATO and the Western Alliance. And it was President Ronald Reagan calling on Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev to tear down this wall. The United States not only provided a blueprint for freedom, it was also determined to defend it. When I started working on our Eastern European desk, from which I soon moved to the Soviet desk in the German Foreign Ministry, it was still unthinkable that the Warsaw Pact would implode any time soon, nor that the GDR would collapse. But the dynamics had already long been set in motion, decades before. Decades that told people across the continent that the United States stood for freedom of choice and would lend steadfast support for her allies' rights to make these choices too. Decades in which the success, prowess, and development of Western Europe, and certainly of Western Germany, told people across the continent how the right to make democratic choices could alter the political and economic trajectory of nations. It was this dynamic, soon potent all over Eastern Europe, that culminated in the fall of the wall. Eastern Germans took to the streets to take back what was theirs. No skirmishes, no violence, a peaceful revolution. It was incredible. Suddenly, everything seemed possible. As soon as the wall came down, everybody asked what this would mean for German unification. This was by no means a foregone conclusion. We all know there were intense discussions among the Western allies and between the allies and the Soviet Union, and of course, within Germany too. There were many critical voices. There were vested interests that did not want to see the two German states reunited. Without American leadership, these voices might have prevailed. It was most fortunate for German history that George H.W. Bush was President of the United States and James Baker, his secretary, at this critical juncture. It was them who recognized the historical moment. It was them who had the courage and the skill to seize the moment. And it was them who placed their trust in the German people. They believed Germany had become a reliable partner, a stable democracy, and a crucial ally in Europe. Arguably, without either of them, reunification might not have happened. In July this year, the Chancellor has asked me to present to the George H.W. Bush Presidential Library a large picture by the renowned German artist Andreas Mühe. It is a photography of George Bush, Mikhail Gorbachev, and Helmut Kohl. 5 copies exist. One of them hangs in the Chancellor's office. It was taken on the 20th anniversary of the fall of the wall in Berlin, when the 3 former leaders met for one last time. They sit in front of 3 pieces of the former wall in an undefined, huge space. In the picture, Helmut Kohl sits center stage, between both presidents who stand. But if you look closer, you realize it is President Bush who actually is in the composition's center stage. And the story of this picture, the story of vision and leadership and courage and trust, is overwhelmingly his. His, and by extension, that of his principal foreign policy advisor at the time, Secretary Baker. Secretary Baker, my country will always remember you as one of the fathers of German unification. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, the American-German friendship in the last century goes back a long way. The United States freed Europe, and indeed Germany, from Nazi oppression. It supported the young democracy and its integration in Europe. And it helped Germany reunite once the wall had come down. Without the United States and its visionary leaders, like James Baker, we would not celebrate the fall of the wall today. Thank you.